Good morning. It's wonderful to be here at ATOM. I'm Margo Georgiadis, co-founder and CEO of Monty Therapeutics, and also a CEO Partner at Flagship Pioneering, which is the innovator of over 100 bioplatform companies. I'm joined with a fabulous set of panelists. Alexander Bente is the founding partner of Advantage VC, where he invests primarily in sports and fitness technology, including connected wellness platforms and that promote physical health and longevity. Cristina Ghenoiu is a partner at Mubadala Capital, focused on biotechnology investing across private and public markets, backing innovative therapeutics and platform companies across the world. Joseph Mocanu is a managing partner of Verge Health Tech Fund, investing in early-stage healthcare and digital health companies addressing global health challenges. And Tom Rando, who is the director of the UCLA Broad Stem Cell Research Center and a leading stem cell biologist whose research on aging and regeneration has helped advance therapeutic innovation in age-related disease and longevity science. So you can see we have a powerful set of voices here to talk about health investing, trends, tensions, and trade-offs. So of course, health and wellness is one of the defining investment areas of the current era, alongside AI, climate, and energy. Of course, this is driven by a lot of fundamentals. By 2030, more than 1 billion people globally will be over 60. Chronic diseases account for roughly 70% of deaths in the world, and healthcare spending represents 10% of global GDP and over 17% in the US. So demand in health isn't cyclical, it's demographic and biological. So as science and technology are enabling us to converge with breakthroughs in aging biology, AI-enabled drug discovery, continuous health data, as we saw earlier today, and a global consumer shift towards prevention and longevity, capital is flowing from frontier therapeutics to digital platforms to consumer wellness. So with us here today, we want to talk about the future and where it's going with this extraordinary group. So why don't we just start with the vision of the future? What do we see as the most exciting areas for transformative returns in health investing over the next decade? Cristina, why don't we start with you? Are we at a durable inflection point in biotech platforms and aging science? And what are the tensions between transformational science and time to value versus capital sources and expectations?
Happy to. First of all, I'm delighted to be here today, so thank you for the invitation. And we are at a really inflection point. We understand biology so much better, and we have so many more tools to accelerate that innovation process. However, we are tricking ourselves to a certain extent in believing that we can deliver returns and results in a very short period of time. Ultimately, it does take several years to get to the right kind of patients, the right kind of clinical studies, and what that translates into is a disconnect between what investors are hoping to get and what biology is allowing us to do. And so what we are seeing a lot in the market is a tremendous opportunity to make investments in companies that are being thrown to the wayside. They are getting lost in the shuffle because they are not delivering at the rate that folks are imagining or hoping to. And so what my hope is today is that what you will take away from the panel today is that we can make a lot of wonderful discoveries. We can make a lot of money as long as we pair patients with scientific reality and with an understanding that we cannot really break through these frontiers without really following the biology series.
Are there some particular areas on biotech that you're particularly excited about as an investor?
Absolutely. So we have solved partially the obesity problem, and that has really addressed a number of chronic diseases. We are, however, understanding today that we are creating another issue. These drugs are allowing us to lose weight very fast. At the same time, they are making us lose muscle, and they're also not durable responses, meaning that once you stop the drug, you gain back that weight, and you gain it in the form of fat. And that can actually accelerate diabetes. So what we would love to do is have durable weight loss, and the way to do that is to increase energy expenditure. And we have someone here who thinks a lot about sports and fitness, and obviously muscle is extremely important in that context. And so what we want to develop, and we have a few of these drugs in our portfolio companies, are what we call energy expenditure mechanisms. These are mechanisms. It's a pill that essentially mimics the benefit of exercise. So it's like going to the gym for 1 hour every day for a month. It boosts your metabolism rate, and essentially it allows you to lose fat, preserve muscle, and when you stop taking the drug, you maintain that.
Interesting. Well, since you teed it up for Alex so well there, what's your view on what's exciting in sort of fitness, wellness?
Thank you, Cristina. That was the perfect introduction. Yeah, so as you already mentioned, my background is sports. My family's history is in sports. I tried to become a professional tennis player. I wasn't quite good enough, unfortunately, but that has also then shaped my career. So I've been an investor in the sports technology ecosystem for the past 10 years. And there are different areas that we look at, from obviously the fan engagement media side, which is not relevant for today, but obviously also then the second big area is human performance. And I think the clear trend that we see there is that technologies that are being used to help professional athletes become a little bit better, perform a little bit better, start trickling down to mass markets, to the consumers. And that's honestly also, we're a venture-focused fund, so we want to see venture returns. That's where the bigger markets are. If you just sell to the professional sports teams, that's typically not big enough. Yeah. But again, the interesting part is, and especially also as we look at fitness as part of this human performance area, you just made a great point. We for example, we invested in a company out of Austin called Ladder that tried to use software and engineering to get people to stick with a workout routine. And that's very much also they're looking at partnerships with the GLP-1 providers, because you lose muscle. And we all know how important it is to be strong, right, for your longevity. And but that's how we try to invest in this ultimate trend, right, that is backing up, right, what does it take to be healthy, right? We try to be, okay, let's use what professional athletes are using to improve the performance. Let's see which of these technologies can scale to the consumer markets. But even like when it comes to something as basic as, okay, let's go to the gym and work out, why do so many people struggle with keeping that routine? Can we back founders and technologies and companies that are able to deliver a new kind of product and to the user? And it's incredible how I'm mentioning that company because they have, just in the last year, they've grown from 100,000 to about 400,000 users. And it's just a fitness app in a sense, but they really do it differently, where they use certain gamification elements, community elements. It really, it has helped so many people lose weight, be stronger, and I think that's what we should strive for, right?
So the holistic behavioral change. What other areas of that translation between performance sports and the consumer side do you think are going to be some of the most exciting and scalable over the next decade?
Well, I mean, you just mentioned it. It's holistic, right? It's every part of a professional athlete's life is ultimately also in some way a part of everyone else's life. Right? Sleep, recovery, training. That started as a human performance company. It's now a digital health company, right? Which obviously tracks your heart rate and so on. We clearly see that same trend when it comes to your blood work, right? How that becomes easier now to track on a regular basis as a consumer and to actually have a baseline over multiple years. Right? Professional athletes used to do this on a regular basis. Of course. We usually only do it maybe once a year, or only if something's wrong, right? I think in general, just the athletes are very proactive when it comes to, not just prevention, but also just, again, the overall fitness level, the performance. And that should be our mindset, I think, for everyone, not just to treat them when something's gone wrong. No, let's try to improve the strength and I think
integrated biometrics, tracking, continuous monitoring. coupled with, it sounds like behavior, gamification community is what you see as really scaling.
Yeah, I think ultimately which companies will win. It's tough to invest in companies that many of them claim to have proprietary data tracking. A lot of that is sometimes not quite as interesting if you look at it, but it's really, I think, the brand, the distribution, and the community become very important as well, especially with the companies we invest in.
Yeah.
And if you consider AI these days, I think that's only going to be more crucial, is brand community.
Right, because the technology can be increasingly...
It's almost commoditized in certain areas.
Commoditized.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Joseph, you've spent an enormous amount of time looking at health tech infrastructure and digital models. What's your view of the most interesting platforms that you're excited about? And you also have that global perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you again. It's wonderful to be here. I think the parts that I'm most excited about are probably not the areas that I'm investing in right now. I'm usually investing around areas of my frustrations that I wish were resolved, especially when we know what the problems are. But if I were to go back to your question in platforms, we're at an interesting crossroads. I mean, growing up and when I was doing my PhD and all this, I was just overwhelmed by the complexity of biology. Even if you were to just look at proteins just by itself, let alone the genes that encoded the mRNA that encoded those proteins, and then the modifications that happens to those proteins afterwards, silencing mechanisms, this whole multi-omics, you have this combinatorial explosion that far exceeds the capacity of a single human to understand. And for whoever's playing, has their buzzword bingo cards out right now, the advent of artificial intelligence is truly a game changer. It truly, truly is. I don't think it's hype. I think Pandora's box has been opened, and now we have the computational ability to make sense of these quadrillions of interactions that can possibly happen. So we are upon an era of unprecedented understanding and unprecedented personalization. So where this translates to, maybe the overlap between my frustrations and what I'm excited about, is the collection of clinically relevant data in affordable and accessible ways, and then having the ability to act upon them. So, novel sensors, novel algorithms, the breakthrough in consumer hardware and consumer electronics, personal tracking, those are fantastic, and those are only going to get better with time. Because it isn't just the multi-omics, it's the inputs and outputs as well that will determine how the network behaves. And I think, human nature is reductionist. We like to think of short-term quick solutions. If you only take this pill, all your problems will go away. That's just not the way biology works. It's a network, and it's like you have different weights and different nodes, and when you pull on something, it will affect other nodes along that network. So now we're at this interesting time where maybe we'll make sense of it. And I was just talking about humans, not even the trillions of bacteria that live inside of us that have their own communication language and have their own impacts on our biology. So in short, that's what I'm excited about right now. But man, we have so many basic things we need to fix, and those are more of my frustrations we can maybe talk about later.
Well, it sounds like you and Cristina had some common threads, right? The body is a system. We can think that GLP-1's a panacea, but then you're going to create secondary issues, and so we have to really think about those. Tom, you've spent a career as an innovative scientist really pushing the boundaries of longevity science. What are some of the most exciting areas as you think about where we can all both be excited about the science, and also which are the areas that you think are hype versus really ready to scale?
So thank you, Margo. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, my favorite topic to talk about, so thank you for introducing this. We've been working on aging research for a lot of my career, and it really has been an explosion of research in the last 10 or 20 years, really fundamentally changing our understanding of the biology of aging. And the promise of the biology of aging in terms of therapeutics is prevention. It's not treatment, really. It's the idea that if we understand the fundamental biology of why we age and why aging itself is a risk factor for all the diseases, potentially we can intervene therapeutically in the process and prevent at the same time or delay all of these age-related diseases. So this is really a very exciting time. And from work we did in my lab back in the early 2000s, we were looking at what we thought was rejuvenation biology. And I remember going around to companies and very excited about this and thinking, there's a therapeutic dividend here. And I was told over and over and over again, there will never be a therapy for aging because it has to be as safe as water. You're giving it to healthy people. Well, that mindset has definitely changed. And we've seen, and I think when Google got in the game with the company Calico,
Yes.
I think people really started to believe, okay, there's an opportunity here. And we've seen an explosion in companies in aging research really across the spectrum. The challenge has been, I think, that the return is long-term. And what I've seen in terms of this space is individuals come entrepreneurial with an idea for a company in aging, and fairly quickly they become a company in osteoarthritis or Alzheimer's disease or something that is really tractable. The long-term view of investing in a truly preventive therapy is usually beyond the return that investors are looking for. So I think there's a conflict between the return on investment time frame and what we really need to invest in terms of aging research and developing that into therapeutics. That comes more from the university, but I think we need to look at longer time frame investments to really realize that return.
So are you seeing any shift? Because a lot of people talk about obesity, right, is the biggest single drug class of all time. But coming close behind that are a lot of the innovations in neurology. And how do we think about some of those areas that could be ripe for intervention? Are you seeing any shift as people understand that there is both a pharmaceutical market, but also enormous consumer pay opportunities for some of these earlier intervention therapies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, you mentioned hype. I mean, I think in the field of aging, hype always precedes everything that we really can do. So that is the real challenge, is distinguishing what is hype and what is really possible. And then you get into kind of the consumer market, and that's partly where the hype comes from. I mean, there's a supplement for anything you want to take, for any disease you have, any condition. And that's where we have to really distinguish between what is the hard science and what is the soft science. I mean, even in these supplements, there's science behind it. There's evidence in animals that this drug or that drug might work, or this supplement might work, but we just don't have the evidence in humans, and yet it's being marketed as potentially therapies. And I think that's where the challenge comes in terms of distinguishing where we are in terms of knowledge in humans versus the consumer market, which, in the aging field, people will buy anything.
Yeah, so if you had to pick two areas that you think are the most exciting over the next 5 years, that investors who really want to support this research, either on the scientific side or in terms of the translation from bench to bedside, where should they focus?
There are a lot of exciting areas in aging research. I mean, one area that I'm interested in and has actually already gotten to a point of an FDA approval is the idea of the so-called reprogramming, which is essentially how do we intervene using pharmacology or other biologics to make old cells young. I mean, I know that sounds science fiction-y, but we really have data in the laboratory that we can actually essentially reverse what looks like aging phenotype. So to me, that is a really exciting and really cutting-edge area of research that has come from the bench, actually already going into patients. And I think we'll see more and more of that. I mean, the company that many people in the room will have heard of, Altos Labs, was formed on the basis of exploring and exploiting this kind of reprogramming to rejuvenate cells and tissues. So I think we'll see more of that. And I think the area of synthetic biology, which was mentioned earlier, is also the idea, I think, going forward, that we will see therapies for aging that are more biologic than they are pharmacologic. And that will be, I think, a trend over this century. These aren't in the next 5-10 years, but I think increasingly we'll see that as an opportunity, first starting with treatment of specific diseases and then getting into a more long-term view of the prevention using targeting aging.
Well, thank you for your work. I wanted to remind everyone that we're open for audience questions. If you go to the Slido app, it's Adam 2. So we're happy to take any questions tonight. You've had at least an intro from everyone on the panel. On that longevity side, are there any other panelists that would like to pile on in terms of their points of view, either Cristina in therapeutic exciting areas that you're interested in, or you, Alex, as we think about the future of health and wellness and prevention?
Yeah, Tom made a very good point, which had to do with the timelines that it takes for the prevention studies to really give us an answer, and how those timelines don't align with investor timelines for returns. And I'll say that the key in my perspective is the regulatory body. So the FDA stepping in and allowing us to make very science-driven, data-driven decisions about the biomarkers, and essentially having those biomarkers serve as an accelerated approval point for some of these therapies. And one good example for this would be cardiovascular. So after the obesity crisis that we seemingly have started to solve, there's also the cardiovascular crisis, which is atherosclerosis. And there are therapies out there that are trying to remove the plaque. And essentially, there are investors who wish they could drop this drug into the water so everyone can just have it, and they just prevent the plaque from being built. But if you are to actually run that study, it's going to take you a lot of time and a lot of patience to essentially convince the FDA that your study prevents the accumulation of plaque. And so to the extent to which we can come up with biomarkers and all sorts of essentially imaging processes that can allow us to conclude very accurately, you're no longer building plaque, and that should be related to a drop in mortality rates without having to prove that a priori, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, you're just basically stuck in this 10-year-long or 5-year-long time frame that it makes it really hard.
Yeah, it's very hard to fund those trials because the scale and the cost of them. Yeah, we see that in our own therapeutic development. You typically need to land in a more severe stage of a disease, and then you can, with the right safety profile, have a chance to back it up to earlier stages of disease. But that cycle time is quite long. Alex, what are you seeing also on this side? Because obviously, exercise is so tightly correlated with longevity.
Yeah, it's very different, obviously, perspective again, but I think the key to longevity is actually, the behavior change that happens every day, right? And again, what we can learn from sports, from professional athletes is, for example, data for the sake of capturing data doesn't mean anything, right? The data has to inform a behavior change, right? That leads to an increased performance in the short run and then longevity in the long run, right? And I think that's what, again, tennis was always my sport, still is, right? Why are certain athletes all of a sudden able to play into their 40s, right? It's obviously a combination of different technologies, but ultimately also, right, the behavior change, right? And every single detail matters, from what you put into your body nutrition-wise to different recovery technologies and so on. I think that same concept applies also to consumers, right? And that's what we're most passionate backing, is not, again, some new device that helps track some data point where no consumer really knows what to do with that, but it's nice to have. It's more like, okay, what actually changes behavior, which then accumulates over the long run, right, to longevity, right? And I think that's maybe also just the athlete wired in me, right? I think it's great, the GLP-1s, but I'm always like, here, take a pill for everything. Nothing replaces the work, of going into the gym regularly, right? That still is a foundation, what I believe in, in how we invest. Very important, the work that all of you do, obviously. I'm not saying that, but I think there's also just that side to it. I think in helping people make better decisions with their bodies, with their health. That's how I view that.
Yeah. Tom Rando, can you connect the dots on that as we think about, right, we all know that nutrition, right, exercise, right, these things are highly correlated, right, as we think about cell evolution and how people do age in a different way. Are there some ways in which we can think about innovating and creating new, now that we have so much more data, the multi-omic data, so much more insight?
I might propose, oh, sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay. I might propose something kind of counterintuitive, in that I actually believe that we have all the technology that we need, and where we need the innovation is on the policy and financing side. So we talked about, Cristina mentioned regulatory. There's something potentially risque to suggest that maybe the FDA approval comes once you prove safety and let the market decide efficacy with real-world evidence and peer-reviewed publications that come out in time and let the actual decision maker decide what's appropriate. The other thing is that we've been financing healthcare in a way that is incompatible with what ails us these days. Previously it used to be fee-for-service, healthcare was very reactive. Most of what killed us was from infectious disease, accidents, and trauma, and now we're at this place where the very healthcare systems and the financing around it, even the Ministry of Health, it's really the Ministry of Sick, is really designed around that old world before we were addressing these lifestyle diseases and diseases that would magnify as our lifespans extend. So I do think that the way that healthcare is financed, the way that everything is incentivized, and the way that regulatory is structured should be in a way that allows for these longer time frames. And that's probably where the most innovation is needed, to be honest.
Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, so again, I think a lot of the points being made are really overlapping here, and Christina's point about biomarkers is something we talk about all the time, because we're not going to do studies of lifespan in humans. They're just too long and too expensive. And yet, if we could have a marker that said, you take this treatment for a year, you have slowed your rate of aging. We don't have those yet, but that is a major, focus of the field, is to get the right markers. And people have probably heard about epigenetic clocks, and these are, very popular. These are now, again, available to consumers. We just don't know how to interpret them, and we don't know how to use them yet. But I think that's another very exciting area as we move from these kind of measures that assess the process of aging, the biological aging, not just how many years since birth, but how your body's actually aging, will transform the way we do trials in this way. I mean, Alex's point, I think, you've got to do the hard work. I agree, and a lot of what we've studied, for all the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been invested, a lot of what we know comes down to diet and exercise, just what your mother told you. Eat less and exercise more. And I think the biochemistry of that overlaps with the kinds of drugs we're developing, biologics we're developing to make bodies more resilient. And studies of athletes and performance really does overlap with the interventions that we think about it as aging, because if you look at an athlete who's trying to enhance their muscle function, for example, as we get older, we lose muscle, and we want to enhance muscle function. It's just, as we get older, the challenges are more difficult, and the biology begins to change.
Right, it's so connected, right? There's a lot of research on GLP-1s that they're not as safe for people over 65 because they end up losing the muscle mass and then falling more often, right? So there's a lot of challenges. We have several audience questions, and then we'll go to you, Cristina, as well. Since we're on with you, Tom, how early in life should we be starting to think about aging and longevity? And do we have access to data relating to early years to allow this, to really think more systematically about how bodies evolve?
Yeah, so I would say two things. I'd say, first of all, we know that early life experiences affects the trajectory of our aging. So it can't be too early. I mean, really, even childhood, even in utero, people talk about effects on long-term aging trajectories. Not that we necessarily intervene then, but we obviously want to optimize health from early in life. Having said that, there's also evidence that therapies, and this is in experimental animals, started in middle or even late life, can even extend health span beyond that. So it's never too late, even though the earlier the better. It may never be too late to start paying attention. One shouldn't give up if, after one is 70 or 80, there's nothing you can do. There is still. And I think one can really prolong the benefits even in later life. And I just want to make, we're using the term longevity. In the field, we really have shifted the notion from lifespan to health span, right? So we're not necessarily only trying to have people live longer. In fact, for sure, what we're really trying to do is for as long as they live, and the longer the better, we want them healthy. So the focus isn't just on how long we live, but how well we live.
Yeah, Cristina?
I was going to bring back a point that Joseph made, but Tom just made another important point, which is that indeed what happens to you really early in life can really impact your trajectory. And there were longitudinal studies of obese teenagers that lost weight, but then in their 40s and 50s, their chronic diseases were much more reflective of having an obesity state. So there's more and more evidence that your metabolic state sort of leaves a mark on your genome such that later in life it really affects you. So I think that indeed we should really focus on starting early, and ultimately one marker that maybe most of you have heard about, which is the mitochondrial level in your muscles and your brain and your liver. They actually reach peak at about 26 years old, and after that, it's all downhill. So it's, the earlier you start, the more exercise you do. There are not many ways in which we can build mitochondria these days, but through exercise and a bit of stress induced, maybe from different intermittent fasting and so on. But I think the earlier, the better. And if I may, Joseph made a really important point that is also somewhat controversial, which is that should we allow all of these wonderful technologies to come to patients only with a safety study? And I don't think our healthcare system is set up for that, because in terms of reimbursement, what is going to happen? You're going to have 10, 20 different drugs for the same disease. How are you going to reimburse all of them, and what kind of metrics you're going to use? It's going to be really hard, and also you're putting all of the decision making in the hands of your physicians. And I think all of us have experienced quite a great deal of variability in the way people think and people choose therapies. And I just don't know if I trust my physician to make that decision without having a regulatory body and the data to provide information.
Yeah, that's maybe a good segue to another audience question, which is, given their evolution from workout tracking to holistic health snapshots and now serving roles in clinical trials, what will be the next role of wearables as we look ahead? Anybody have a perspective on that, Joseph?
I do, and maybe I'll kill two birds with one stone with that. I think wearables will prove whether something works or not. I think that's going to be one of the really important things. There is a separate notion between regulatory approval and reimbursement. And it could be really that the reimbursement decisions on these things that are deemed safe are more in the hands of health economists as opposed to in the hands of the regulatory agency. So it could very well be that, if it's not reimbursed, then it's self-pay, and maybe there's a segment of the population that may have a little bit more disposable income or a little bit more willingness to risk. And it may also place market pressures for these things to not be so expensive. So it could be an interesting dynamic where it's actually the real-world evidence, and maybe that also allows for a little bit of N-of-1 studies, which I think Dina will probably comment on a little bit later, to really prove whether this thing's actually working. If it actually is working, then let's pay for it, and let's define a value threshold,
How do you think, Alex, about the wearables technology? Obviously, you've done a lot of work in that space. How do you think about that from a consumer perspective, but also a consumer collaborating with their health professional?
Yeah, well, as an investor, what's always also important to us, because for years, what we've seen different companies working on something like this, but with different data aspects, right, from nutrition to ultimately, distribution is the key, right? And who owns currently our fingers and our wrists? That's pretty coveted territory already, and they're dominated by big tech and a couple of other firms, right? So ultimately, you have to probably integrate with them because they have the distribution power. I think that's just from a business perspective. When it comes to the consumer market, that's the reality, right? So smart apparel has been interesting, right? Okay, but we haven't really seen too many breakouts there.
Yeah.
Very sports specific typically though also. And then, we've backed some companies, for example, that try to make shoe wear smart. That initially it started, again, perfect case, but soccer, right? If we track what's happening in the foot, we know exactly how good a child is even. It's a very simple use case. That has all of a sudden now grown into more also research when it comes to just movement analysis, how you're distributing your weight and so on and so on and so on. So, but I think from a health perspective, I think distribution is key, and number two is, again, it's very similar to what I said earlier. Data for the sake of tracking data is not worth anything.
Yeah.
Right? And that was my issue also early on with Whoop. It was a nice to have, but it didn't change my behavior at all. And I think that's also where maybe some of these, maybe AI will help make sense of that data a lot more in a personalized way and give you actual clear guidelines and hey, this is how you should shape your behavior. But I think the human-to-human interaction is still key. So But we also backed a company called Lotus AI, and they just want to make that relationship between the consumer and their primary care doctor backed by AI, but just more efficient. But at the end of the day, there's still the trust between your primary care physician and yourself.
Yeah.
So that's how I view it, but at the end of the day, there's still a human connection, and maybe all these data points, leveraging AI, we can make sense of that a lot more on a consumer level where it actually dictates behavior. Very similar to what I said earlier, right? That should be the key, right? Changing behavior to make us healthier and stronger.
Yeah. Well, and there are so many interesting wearables companies. I think about Beacon Biosignals, really fundamental in clinical trials to getting a baseline. So many trials, especially in the neurological sciences or other areas, get canceled because of an event that actually was diagnosable before the trial, or you can't get people in the trials because they don't have home monitoring options, or now you can even diagnose things like sleep apnea at home and over time potentially distinguish between some of the different neurological diseases as you can get a baseline really cost effectively. Tom, are there other wearables that you're seeing as exciting as you think about the future of longevity science?
I mean, I think the value of wearables is really getting real world data. You know, as everyone knows, we do clinical trials and then they show some benefit and then we go out into the world and we see, you know, much less effect in the real world. And so I think getting that data, and I do think that this is where AI will be absolutely critical, is taking that data and seeing how people respond. Because really the promise there is in personalized medicine, which we've been talking about, and the name has changed over time, but it is about, given your genomics, given your physiology, you know, which drug do you take for this or that, and everyone responds differently. So I think, you know, the value of wearables is really just collecting the data that we wish we had on people to understand how they respond, how they change over time, and then how we apply that to therapeutics.
Yeah, so I think we've covered a lot of ground. We have to fundamentally understand cells and cell evolution. We have to integrate all the omics data and gain better fundamental insights about individuals and populations. We also have to, it's great to have all the data, but if we can't change behavior, it's hard for us to make systemic change. One of the other questions that we got is China's out competing us. They can recruit patients far more quickly and cheaply to clinical trials than we can in the US and Europe. How can we think differently about how we can address this problem as we think about advancing therapies? I don't know, Cristina, if you have a perspective on that.
We think about it all the time, every day. It is absolutely true that China has gone from being a quarterback to the US development, drug development, to actually putting out new science. You look at all of the different high impact journals. I think last year was the first time that multiple Chinese universities had top 10 papers there. So they are now innovating, they are doing it much faster and, you know, way cheaper, like 1/3 the cost. So I think that for the moment, unless there is a really profound change at the regulatory bodies, the way the US government is thinking about our competitive edge and where are they actually putting capital at work and providing grants and support, we are going to fall behind. And so that's a reality that the way the venture folks are trying to solve and the way the pharma companies are trying to solve is by partnering. And so what you have seen now is an evolution. I would say even like 18 months ago, you could go to China and you know, get an excellent quality phase 1 drug and have a deal. You actually got a really good valuation. Nowadays, they are extremely sophisticated. They ask really high upfronts, really high back-end milestones. So they are becoming true partners in this effort. And they're obviously, they want their companies to start you know, trading on NASDAQ or the US Stock Exchange. So they want us to work with them.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists for all their amazing contributions to this conversation. There were a lot more questions, so I hope you'll find the panelists and continue the conversation the rest of today. Thank you so much for this opportunity.